Drillmaster Vexthak stood at the edge of what could generously be called a training ground, and what any sane being would call certain death with foliage. His forearms gestured dramatically at the sprawling nightmare of vegetation that stretched beyond the horizon, where trees the size of starships competed for sunlight while things with too many teeth competed for lunch. "Behold," he announced to the assembled cadets, his voice carrying that special blend of authority and barely concealed sadistic glee that all drill instructors seem to master, the Mortis Jungle. In your language, this translates roughly to "where hope goes to die." He paused for dramatic effect, his compound eyes scanning the group of young beings who represented the finest military academies from across the Galactic Coalition. Statistically speaking, 0.73% of cadets who enter this jungle survive the full 7-day exercise. A Thraxian cadet, all scales and attitude, raised one clawed hand. "Drillmaster, what about the other 99.27%? Vexthak's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among his species. "Oh, they provide excellent fertilizer. The jungle thanks them for their service." The cadets shifted nervously. All except one. Cadet Maya Chen sat cross-legged on a fallen log, using a piece of flint to methodically scrape bark from a branch she'd apparently acquired, while the others were still figuring out which end of their plasma rifles went pew. The human looked about as concerned as someone deciding what to have for breakfast. "The jungle," Vexthak continued, really warming to his subject now, "is home to the blood-thorn vines, which will drain you dry before you realize you're bleeding. The whisper moths, whose sonic attacks can liquefy internal organs. And, of course, the crown stalker, a predator so perfectly evolved that by the time you see it, you've already been dead for several minutes." Maya paused in her bark scraping. "Wait, how does that work exactly? The being dead for several minutes part?" "Temporal displacement venom," Vexthak replied matter-of-factly. "Kills you 3 minutes before it bites you. Very efficient." "Huh." Maya went back to her work. "That's gonna be annoying." The Drillmaster's compound eyes focused on her with the intensity of someone trying to figure out if they were dealing with supreme confidence or complete insanity. In Maya's case, it was probably both. "Cadet Chen, you seem remarkably calm." Maya looked up, holding what was now clearly recognizable as a bow stave. "Well, you did say 0.73% survive, right? That means it's possible. And frankly, Drillmaster, after growing up in the Australian outback, a jungle that tries to kill you just feels like Tuesday." A Zilithian cadet, think insectoid but with an attitude problem, buzzed his wings dismissively. "Typical human arrogance. Your species always thinks that we're special." Maya interrupted, now stringing her improvised bow with what looked like vine fiber. "Buddy, let me tell you something about humans. We're not special. We're just too stupid to know when we're supposed to die." She stood up, testing the bow's draw. The weapon looked primitive compared to the plasma rifles and energy weapons the other cadets carried, but there was something unsettlingly purposeful about the way she handled it. "You see," Maya continued, addressing the group like she was giving a lecture on quantum physics instead of standing at the edge of certain doom, "my ancestors survived ice ages, plagues, and the invention of social media. They looked at animals with better teeth, claws, venom, and armor, and said, 'Yeah, but can you throw a pointy stick really, really hard?' Spoiler alert, they couldn't." Vexthak found himself genuinely intrigued despite his better judgment. "And you believe this primitive weapon will help you survive what has killed thousands of trained warriors?" Maya's grin could have powered a small space station. "Drillmaster, this isn't just a weapon. This is applied human stubbornness, in stick form." She pulled an arrow from what was apparently a quiver she'd woven while everyone else was still trying to process the mortality statistics. "Plus, it's quiet, reliable, and doesn't run out of batteries at the worst possible moment." "Batteries?" The Thraxian cadet looked confused. "Oh right, you guys have fusion cells. See? That's your first mistake. Over-engineering. This bow has exactly 0 moving parts that can break, jam, or decide they don't like the humidity. The Drillmaster raised one of his 4 hands. Enough philosophical discussion. Cadets, you have 7 days to reach the extraction point on the far side of the jungle. You may work in teams or alone. Your survival supplies are whatever you can carry. Begin in 5 minutes. The cadets scattered, checking weapons, adjusting pack straps, and generally engaging in the sort of frantic preparation that suggested they'd actually been listening to the mortality statistics. Maya, meanwhile, wandered over to a nearby stream and began collecting smooth stones. "Cadet Chen," Vexthak called out, unable to contain his curiosity. "What are you doing?" "Making backup ammunition," she replied, as if this were the most obvious thing in the universe. "Also checking if this stream has any of those fish with the glowing spots. If it does, we'll want to avoid drinking from it unless we fancy internal luminescence." "How could you possibly know about lumina fish?" Maya stood up, tucking several stones into her improvised quiver. "YouTube University, Drillmaster. Best education system in the galaxy. You can learn anything from how to build a nuclear reactor to why you shouldn't eat glowing things. Though, honestly, that second one should be common sense." The buzzer sounded, and the cadets began moving into the jungle. Maya watched them go, noting who stuck together, who went alone, and who was already making enough noise to alert every predator within several parsecs. "Not coming with us, human?" the Thraxian cadet called back. "Nah, I'll give you guys a head start. Wouldn't be fair otherwise." Maya's tone suggested she was doing them a favor, not the other way around. As the last of the cadets disappeared into the green hell, Vexthak found himself walking alongside Maya. This wasn't part of the exercise, but his curiosity had officially overridden his professionalism. "Tell me, Cadet Chen," he said as they entered the jungle proper, "what makes you so confident?" Maya ducked under a vine that definitely had too many thorns and an attitude problem. "Well, Drillmaster, it's like this. Every other species in the galaxy evolved on their nice, stable homeworlds, where the biggest threat was maybe running out of their favorite fermented grain beverage. Humans evolved on a planet that spent 4 billion years trying to kill everything on it." She paused to examine a flower that was definitely watching them back. "Earth has weather that can kill you, animals that can kill you, plants that can kill you, and geology that can kill you. We have spiders whose bite causes priapism." "I'm afraid to ask, but what's priapism?" "Let's just say it's the most embarrassing way to die in recorded history." Maya carefully stepped around the watching flower. "My point is, humans didn't develop faster reflexes or better armor or telepathic abilities. We developed pattern recognition and an irrational refusal to accept death as a viable option." A sound echoed through the jungle, something between a scream and a mechanical failure. One of the cadets had apparently met something unfriendly. "Sounds like the whisper moths found someone," Vexthak observed. Maya nodded, pulling out her bow. "Poor guy probably tried to fight them with his plasma rifle. Bright lights and loud noises. Basically a dinner bell for anything that hunts by sensory input." She knocked an arrow. "Where there's one whisper moth, there's usually a whole colony." "And how exactly do you plan to—" Maya's arrow whistled through the air, followed immediately by a wet thud and an inhuman shriek. Turns out moths, even big scary telepathic ones, still have the same basic anatomy. Hit the thorax where the wings attach, and they go down like a sack of angry potatoes. 3 more shapes fluttered through the canopy toward them, and Maya's hands moved in a blur. 3 more arrows, 3 more thuds, 3 fewer whisper moths. Vexthak stared at her. "How did you know where to aim?" "Drillmaster, I grew up in a place where everything either wants to eat you, poison you, or make you deeply uncomfortable. You learn to spot the weak points fast, or you become a cautionary tale." Maya retrieved her arrows, cleaning them on some surprisingly absorbent leaves. "Plus, basic biology is pretty universal. Wings need muscles, muscles need attachment points. Attachment points are usually vulnerable." They continued deeper into the jungle, and Vexthak began to understand why the survival rate was so appallingly low. The Mortis jungle didn't just want to kill you, It wanted to kill you creatively. Plants that looked like safe resting spots turned out to be digestive systems. Paths that seemed clear were actually carefully constructed hunting grounds. Even the air itself felt malevolent. Maya, however, seemed to be treating the whole thing like a particularly interactive nature documentary. "Oh, look, bloodthorn vines," she said cheerfully, pointing to what looked like perfectly normal jungle vines, except for the way they were slowly reaching toward them. "See how they're trying to look all innocent? Classic ambush predator behavior. They'll wait until you're focused on something else, then—" She spun and put an arrow through the main stem of a vine that had been creeping up behind Vex Thack. "They go for the jugular, or whatever passes for a jugular in your species. No offense." "None taken," Vex Thack managed, watching the severed vine writhe in apparent agony before going still. "But how did you know it was there?" "Shadow was wrong," Maya said simply. "Vines don't usually cast shadows that move independently unless they're trying to strangle someone. It's one of those little tells you pick up." Another scream echoed through the jungle, this one cut off abruptly. "That'll be the crown stalker," Maya observed, studying the canopy above them. "Temporal displacement venom, right? Kills you 3 minutes before it bites you?" "Correct." Maya pondered this. "So theoretically, if I kill it 4 minutes before it bites me, I should be fine, right?" "That's not how temporal displacement works, Cadet Chen." "Sure it is. It's all about getting your timeline sorted." She pulled out another arrow, this one with a different kind of point. "This is a broadhead arrow, designed for maximum tissue damage. If something's going to mess with my personal timeline, I'm going to mess with its cardiovascular system." She drew back the bow and aimed at what looked like empty air about 30 feet up in the canopy. "Cadet Chen, there's nothing there. Drillmaster, with respect, there's a 200-pound apex predator hanging from that branch pretending to be a bunch of leaves. The displacement effect might fool temporal sensors, but it doesn't change the fact that it still has mass and therefore casts shadows." The arrow flew true, and suddenly there was definitely something there. Something large, angry, and bleeding profusely from what had probably been a perfectly good thoracic cavity. The crown stalker materialized fully as it fell, revealing a creature that looked like someone had crossed a panther with a praying mantis and given the result a very bad attitude and opposable thumbs. "Huh," Maya said, examining the corpse. "Turns out temporal displacement doesn't help much when you're dealing with good old-fashioned blood loss." Vex Thack was beginning to suspect that the survival statistics for this jungle were about to change dramatically. "Cadet Chen, in 30 years of running this exercise, I have never seen anyone identify and eliminate a crown stalker within the first 2 hours." Maya shrugged. "Drillmaster, my grandmother used to hunt rabbits that could see 3 seconds into the future. Temporal shenanigans are just Tuesday in the Chen family." They pressed on, and Vex Thack found himself taking notes. Maya's approach to jungle survival was unlike anything in the tactical manuals. She didn't fight the environment. She negotiated with it. "See this tree?" she said, running her hand along the bark of something that looked like it belonged in a fever dream. "Symbiotic relationship with the local insect population. They keep the bark clean, it provides shelter, which means if we don't disturb the insects—" She moved carefully around the base of the tree, and sure enough, nothing tried to eat them. "Most predators use the path of least resistance," she continued. "They set up in obvious hiding spots, ambush points, anywhere prey animals have to go. So the trick is to not go where prey animals would go. And where would prey animals go? Anywhere that looks safe, feels familiar, or offers obvious resources." Maya pointed to a crystal-clear pool of water surrounded by soft grass. Like that, for instance. Even from a distance, Vex Thack could see shapes moving in the water, things with too many fins and an obvious interest in anything that got close to drink. "So where do we get water?" Maya pulled out what looked like a hollow reed and stuck it into the base of a tree. That was definitely not the kind of tree that should have hollow spaces. Clean water began to drip out. "Everything in this jungle has to get water from somewhere," she explained. Trees are basically really tall straws. Find the right kind, tap it properly, and you've got a renewable water source that doesn't involve getting eaten by whatever lives in the pretty pools. By the third day, they'd encountered no fewer than 15 different species of highly evolved predator, all of which had apparently spent millions of years perfecting the art of creative murder, and all of which were now significantly deceased. Maya's approach was disturbingly consistent. Identify the threat, find the weak point, apply arrow with extreme precision, move on as if she hadn't just casually invalidated several million years of evolution. The razor worms were impressive, she commented as they stepped over what remained of a creature that had apparently been part earthworm, part chainsaw, and all bad intentions. Burrowing through solid rock, sensing vibrations from a mile away, emerging at the perfect moment to bisect their prey. Really elegant predatory adaptation. And yet you killed it with a single arrow. Well, yeah. Doesn't matter how good your offense is if you don't protect your central nervous system. Maya retrieved her arrow from what had presumably been the creature's brainstem. Basic tactical principle. All the armor in the world doesn't help if you leave the control center exposed. Vexthak was no longer just intrigued. He was professionally fascinated. Cadet Chen, your tactical assessment abilities are unusual. Drillmaster, when you grow up in a place where the local wildlife includes spiders that hunt birds, jellyfish that can kill you by existing in the same ocean, and snakes that can unhinge their jaws to swallow things 3 times their size, you learn to think creatively about threat assessment. They crested a ridge and could see the extraction point in the distance, a cleared area where a transport would pick up any survivors. Between them and safety lay what the tactical briefing had described as the Gauntlet, a stretch of jungle so dense with predators that most cadets never even attempted to cross it. So, Maya said, studying the terrain ahead, I count at least 12 different hunting zones, 4 territorial boundaries, and what looks like some kind of communal feeding area, plus whatever's using that really obvious game trail as bait. And your plan? Maya's grin was downright predatory. Drillmaster, you've been thinking about this all wrong. Everyone who enters this jungle tries to sneak through, fight through, or outsmart the predators. But there's a 4th option, which is become something scarier than anything else in here. What followed could only be described as a masterclass in applied intimidation. Maya didn't sneak through the gauntlet. She announced her presence with the kind of confidence usually reserved for apex predators with nothing to fear. The first pack of shadow stalkers to investigate the noise found themselves facing something they'd never encountered, a prey species that not only refused to run, but seemed actively insulted by their presence. Really? Maya called out as the creatures circled her. Pack hunters? That's the best you've got? My neighbor's Chihuahua has more individual courage than your entire species. The lead stalker, clearly unused to being mocked by its lunch, made the mistake of charging. Maya's arrow took it through the eye at 15 feet, and she had 2 more in the air before the first one hit the ground. The remaining stalkers suddenly remembered they had urgent business elsewhere. Apex predators, Maya explained to Vexthak as they walked past the rapidly cooling corpses, are used to being the scariest thing around. Present them with something that genuinely doesn't seem afraid of them, and their whole worldview falls apart. By the time they reached the extraction point, word had apparently gotten around the local ecosystem. Nothing was hunting anymore. Everything was hiding. Maya had somehow managed to terrorize an entire jungle into submission using nothing but attitude and really good aim. The extraction team was already there, looking somewhat confused by the complete absence of their usual work. Drillmaster Vexthak, the medic called out. We're not seeing any casualties. Is the exercise running late? Actually, Vexthak replied, still processing what he'd witnessed. I believe it's running early. Maya had set up what could generously be called a camp, and what more accurately resembled a field headquarters. She'd identified the local water sources, established sight lines to all approaches, and was currently in the process of fletching new arrows from materials she'd apparently just found lying around. Cadet Chen, Vexthak said finally, I have to ask, is this level of competence typical for human military personnel? Maya looked up from her arrow crafting. Oh, hell no, Drillmaster. I'm what you might call an outlier. Most humans would have gotten eaten by the whisper moths on day 1. Then how? My family's kinda weird, she admitted. We've been living in places that actively try to kill us for so many generations that we've basically developed a genetic predisposition toward creative problem solving and an unhealthy relationship with danger. She tested her latest arrow, nodding in satisfaction. Plus, my great-grandmother was a sniper in the resource wars, my grandmother was a wilderness survival instructor, and my mom is a trauma surgeon who specializes in exotic venom cases. Growing up in my family is basically a crash course in applied lethality. The sound of crashing vegetation announced the arrival of the first surviving cadets. The Thraxian and 2 others who looked like they'd been through a blender set to puree. Chen. The Thraxian stared at her in disbelief. How are you not dead? Clean living and superior firepower, Maya replied cheerfully. Also, I packed snacks. She tossed them a bundle of what looked like dried fruit. Jungle berries, high in nutrients, naturally preserved, and importantly, not trying to digest you from the inside out. More survivors trickled in over the next few hours, each looking progressively more traumatized. By the final count, they had achieved something unprecedented in the history of the exercise, a 47% survival rate. Impossible, muttered the extraction team leader, checking his numbers for the 3rd time. Vexthak looked at Maya, who was currently teaching the other survivors how to identify edible plants and clean water sources. Actually, I'm beginning to think it was inevitable. Drillmaster? Commander, I've been running this exercise for 3 decades. I've seen cadets with better weapons, better training, better technology, but I've never seen anyone who approached the jungle as if it were just another problem to be solved rather than an insurmountable challenge. He gestured toward Maya, who was now demonstrating proper arrow placement for maximum stopping power using a diagram she'd drawn in the dirt. That human didn't survive the Mortis jungle, Vexthak continued. She civilized it. As the transport lifted off, carrying its unusually large cargo of survivors, Maya leaned back in her seat and finally allowed herself to relax. Not bad for a week in the woods, she mused. The Thraxian cadet, still processing his survival, looked over at her. Chen, can I ask you something? Sure. That bow of yours, how long did it take you to make it? Maya glanced at the weapon that had proven more effective than plasma rifles, energy cannons, and centuries of military technology. About 15 minutes, she said. Would have been faster, but I wanted to get the balance right. 15 minutes? Well, yeah. It's not like it's complicated. You find a good piece of wood, shape it properly, string it with something that won't break, and then you have a device for making small objects travel very fast in whatever direction you point it. She shrugged. Humans figured this out roughly 50,000 years ago. We've been refining the basic concept ever since. The Thraxian was quiet for a moment. Your species is terrifying. Maya's laughter could probably be heard back in the jungle. Buddy, you have no idea. This was me taking it easy. You should see what happens when we're actually trying to be scary. As the transport headed back toward civilization, carrying its cargo of survivors and one very thoughtful Drillmaster, the Mortis jungle settled back into its usual routine of being an enormous, hungry death trap. Except now, somewhere in the darker reaches of the undergrowth, the stories were already spreading. Stories of the small biped who walked through the hunting grounds like she owned them. Who killed crown stalkers and whisper moths and razor worms not with superior technology or overwhelming force, but with the kind of casual competence that suggested she'd done this sort of thing before. The jungle's predators began to wonder, for perhaps the first time in their evolutionary history, if there might be something out there scarier than they were. They were, of course, absolutely right. But that's a story for another day.